The night descended upon the forest like a black shroud cast across the heavens, swallowing every last glimmer of twilight in its hungry embrace. The cold wind whispered through the trees with an almost sentient voice, carrying secrets that only the ancient woods could understand. It moved through the canopy like an invisible river rustling leaves that had witnessed 1,000 seasons, bending branches that had sheltered countless creatures. The air itself seemed thick with mystery, heavy with the weight of untold stories written in bark and moss. In the depths of this mysterious wilderness, bound tightly to an old tree trunk whose gnarled surface spoke of centuries of survival, lay Ibrahim Traoré, barely conscious, his body racked with pain that seemed to emanate from every nerve ending. His weathered face, usually strong and determined, was now twisted in agony, streaked with dirt and dried blood that had trickled from a gash above his temple. The ropes had cut deep into his skin, leaving wounds that burned with every shallow breath he managed to draw into his lungs. The coarse fibers had been tied with cruel expertise, designed not just to bind, but to torment. His wrists were raw and bleeding, the circulation cut off so severely that his fingers had gone numb hours ago. The intensity of his suffering had dulled his senses, creating a fog in his mind that made thinking difficult. But slowly, like dawn breaking through storm clouds, memory began to return in fragmented pieces. He had been tracking illegal poachers as he had done for years. No, for decades. For more than 20 years, Ibrahim had stood as guardian of the animals, the forest, and nature itself. His entire adult life had been devoted to this calling, this sacred duty that had been passed down through 3 generations of his family. But this time, the enemy had been better prepared, more sophisticated, more dangerous than any he had faced before. They had ambushed him in the darkness with military precision. The butt of a rifle had struck his skull from behind, and everything had gone black, a sudden, violent nothingness that had swallowed him whole. When consciousness returned, creeping back like a reluctant visitor, he found himself bound to this tree, alone, injured, and helpless in a way he had never experienced in all his years in the wild. Ibrahim Traoré had spent 15 years as a wildlife ranger in the Dzanga Reserve, following 15 more years in various other protected areas across Central Africa. His father had been a ranger before him, patrolling these same forests with the same dedication, and his grandfather before that, back in the colonial days when conservation was just beginning to be understood. Conservation wasn't just his profession. It was woven into the very fabric of his identity, stitched into his soul like the intricate patterns his mother had once embroidered on his childhood clothes. He knew every trail in this sector of the forest, from the wide paths used by elephants during their seasonal migrations to the narrow deer tracks that wound through the densest undergrowth. He knew every watering hole, every salt lick, every den and burrow within 100 square miles. He could read the forest like a book written in a language only he and a few others could understand. The broken branch that indicated a leopard's passing, the disturbed earth that revealed a warthog's rooting, the scratches on a tree trunk that marked a bear's territory. The animals knew him too, recognized him as a part of their world rather than a threat. He had nursed wounded antelopes back to health in his small cabin, spending sleepless nights ensuring they stayed warm and hydrated. He had removed snares from leopards' paws, working with terrifying patience as the drugged but still dangerous cats lay unconscious before him. He had once even helped deliver a baby elephant when its mother had complications during birth, reaching deep into the womb to turn the calf, while the matriarch trumpeted her distress, and the herd surrounded them protectively. The poachers he'd been tracking were part of a sophisticated network that stretched across 3 countries and multiple continents. They weren't desperate locals trying to feed their families. Those people Ibrahim understood and often helped by finding alternative livelihoods. These were professionals with expensive equipment, satellite phones, night vision goggles, and connections to international smuggling rings that dealt in ivory, rhino horn, and exotic animal parts destined for traditional medicine markets and wealthy collectors' trophy rooms. Ibrahim had been gathering evidence for months, photographing their movements with a hidden trail camera, documenting their kills, mapping their routes, recording their conversations from concealed positions in the trees. He had compiled enough information to bring down the entire operation, to see these men arrested and imprisoned, to save countless anima. LS from brutal deaths. He'd gotten too close, become too much of a threat, and they'd known it. Someone had talked, or they'd found one of his cameras, or perhaps they'd simply sensed his presence the way predators sense danger. The ground beneath him was damp with evening dew. The air was cold, biting at his exposed skin. He tried to move his hands, but the rope was like iron. Every attempt brought fresh waves of agony, yet he knew time was short and death was near. A soft rustling in the leaves nearby made Ibrahim's breath catch in his throat. The forest seemed to pulse with an unseen heartbeat, as if some massive creature was slowly approaching. For a moment, silence fell like a heavy blanket. Then he remembered the poacher's parting words. "Leave him here, the wolves will finish him. No one hears screams in the forest." They had laughed as they walked away into the darkness. Ibrahim's fists clenched. His voice was weak but determined. "I cannot end here, I won't." The clouds parted overhead. Moonlight broke through and fell directly upon Ibrahim's face, illuminating his wounded skin, the burning rope marks, the dried blood. Everything was now starkly visible in the pale light. But that same moonlight revealed another terrifying reality. In the bushes ahead, two eyes gleamed. Large, deep, and decidedly not human, they held a different nature entirely. The forest seemed to freeze. The sound of heavy footsteps, the crunch of dry leaves, and then a shadow emerged slowly into view. It was so large, so massive, that it seemed like a mountain of snow was crawling toward him. Ibrahim's eyes widened, his heartbeat accelerating. He was not alone in the forest. His true test was about to begin. The shadow emerging from the bushes now stood fully revealed. As the moon's pale light fell upon it, the sight was extraordinary, as if snow itself had been given life. A rare white bear, twice the size of a man, was slowly approaching Ibrahim. Each breath it took turned to mist in the cold air. Its eyes glowed with a faint pinkish light, as though it carried some ancient secret of the forest within them. Ibrahim tried to shift his position, but his body refused to cooperate. His neck was raw and red. His hands had turned blue from restricted circulation. He knew that if this bear struck even once, his next breath might be his last. The bear moved closer. Now it was so near that Ibrahim could feel the warm vapor of its breath against his face. Fear gripped his heart completely. The poacher's laughter echoed in his mind. Perhaps this had been their intention all along, to leave him at the mercy of a predator. Ibrahim's fingers involuntarily curled into fists. He wanted to close his eyes, but a strange curiosity kept them open. If he was going to die, he wanted to know what was coming. The bear sniffed him again. Its large, wet nose moved across Ibrahim's shirt, traveling upward. It seemed to be searching not for prey or an enemy, but for recognition, for something familiar. Then suddenly the bear raised its massive paw, so large that if it struck Ibrahim directly, his spine would shatter. But the paw didn't fall on the man, it fell on the rope. The tension jolted the tree, a powerful shake as if something was trying to tear through wood itself. Ibrahim was stunned. After fear, for the first time, a spark of hope ignited in his mind. Was this predator trying to free him? The bear struck again. The rope loosened slightly. Then it struck a third time with full force. This time its claws sank into the rope. It was pulling with its teeth, tearing with its claws, pushing beyond every limit of its strength. Ibrahim tried to move his trembling hands. The rope was still bound, but cracks had begun to appear in its fibers. Then from somewhere deep in the forest, another sound emerged, so faint that only expert ears could detect it. The bear stopped. Its ears pricked up. Its eyes sharpened. The moment was heavy, as if all of nature was holding its breath, waiting for the outcome. The forest was silent, but danger now felt even closer. Suddenly, from deep within the darkness of the forest, the sound of breaking branches came from within the bushes, as if someone, or something, had deliberately crushed the leaves underfoot. The sound was purposeful, aggressive, announcing an arrival rather than trying to conceal it. Ibrahim's heart filled with fear again, that primal terror that bypasses rational thought and speaks directly to the survival instinct buried deep in every human brain. But this time, alongside the fear, there was also anticipation, a strange curiosity about what would happen next. The bear lowered its head toward the rope with renewed determination, its movements becoming more urgent, more desperate. It grabbed the fibers firmly with its teeth, teeth designed to tear through flesh and crack bones, and pulled with tremendous force. The rope shifted and creaked but didn't break completely, the knots holding despite the assault. Bear struck again with its massive paw, bit down harder, clamping its jaws with enough pressure to crush a man's skull. and yanked with all its considerable strength, its powerful neck muscles bulging with the effort. Ibrahim pushed his shoulders backward with great effort, every muscle in his upper body screaming in protest. The pain was excruciating, waves of agony washing over him with each movement, but hope sustained him through it all. His breathing was labored, coming in short gasps that barely filled his lungs, but his will remained alive, burning like an unquenchable flame in his chest. If he could free himself, perhaps there was a way to save his life, to escape this nightmare and return to civilization. During this desperate struggle, movement came again from the bushes, closer now and more pronounced. Ibrahim turned his head as far as the ropes would allow and saw two yellow eyes glinting between the trees, reflecting the moonlight like polished amber. Then a third pair appeared, then a fourth, then more, like small flames burning in the ink of night, like stars fallen to earth and transformed into something malevolent. They weren't close yet, maintaining a cautious distance, but their presence had become an ominous pulse in the forest's atmosphere, a promise of violence to come. Ibrahim understood with sudden, terrible clarity. The white bear sensed the danger approaching and was hurrying to finish its task before the newcomers arrived. It wasn't just saving him, it was saving itself too. This wasn't simple charity or random kindness. This was relationship, connection, the fulfillment of some unspoken contract between souls. But then, in that critical moment, something shifted in Ibrahim's consciousness. As the moonlight illuminated the bear's white hide, falling across it like a blessing from the heavens, he noticed something he had missed before, a deep, long scar beneath the fur on the bear's shoulder. Old but unmistakable, a ridge of healed tissue that pulled the skin in a distinctive pattern. That moment, his mind opened a window to a forgotten memory, and suddenly he was transported back through time. 3 years ago, on a morning much like any other, the sun just beginning to paint the sky with shades of pink and gold, the mist rising from the forest floor like spirits ascending, Ibrahim had found a helpless white bear cub in the forest during one of his routine patrols. The discovery had stopped him in his tracks, made his blood run cold. Its mother had been killed by poachers just hours before, her magnificent body already cooling on the ground, her fur matted with blood. Fresh blood still stained the earth beneath her, so recent that it hadn't yet been absorbed into the soil or covered by insects. The poachers had taken what they wanted, the gallbladder, prized in certain traditional medicines, and the paws, considered a delicacy in some cultures, and left the rest of her to rot, to be consumed by scavengers, her death serving no purpose beyond human greed. Beside the orphaned cub, barely old enough to survive without its mother, was this same deep wound on its shoulder, fresh and agonizing, bleeding steadily, a gash that ran from the shoulder blade down toward the foreleg. The cub had probably received it trying to defend its mother, or perhaps the poachers had struck it when it wouldn't leave her body, too young to understand that she was gone forever. Ibrahim had lifted the cub into his arms, feeling its tiny heart racing against his chest like a frantic drum, and carried it home through miles of forest trail. The journey had taken hours, and he had whispered to the cub the entire way, promising it would survive, would grow strong, would have a life worth living. He washed the wound carefully with clean water and antiseptic, his hands steady despite his anger at the men who had caused this suffering. He stitched it closed with practiced precision learned from years of field medicine, each suture placed with care. He fed it milk from a bottle, holding it like a human infant, and cared for it under his watchful eye for many days and nights, sleeping in shifts to ensure it was never alone during those critical first weeks. The cub had been weak initially, barely clinging to life, its eyes dull and its breathing shallow. But slowly, day by day, it had grown stronger. Its eyes had brightened, its appetite had returned, and it had begun to play, pouncing on Ibrahim's boots and wrestling with sticks. When the cub had recovered fully, when it was strong enough and old enough to survive on its own, Ibrahim had released it back into the forest. He had walked deep into the wilderness, far from human settlements, and opened the carrier. The cub had hesitated at first, looking back at him with those strange, pale eyes, and then had bounded off into the undergrowth. But as he watched it disappear into the trees, becoming one with the shadows and the green, a question had remained in his heart, haunting him in quiet moments. Will the forest ever remember me? Will this creature remember that a human showed it kindness? Now, 3 years later, bound and helpless, facing death in the darkness, the answer stood before him in flesh and blood and memory. Yes, the forest had remembered. Nature had remembered. That same cub had grown into this magnificent, powerful, and loyal protector standing guard over him now. Ibrahim's heart swelled with emotion. His voice, heavy and broken, managed to whisper, "It's you, isn't it? I didn't abandon you." The bear paused for just a moment. Then it gently pressed its forehead against Ibrahim's cheek, as if nodding in acknowledgement. Immediately after, it returned to its work, biting the rope, tearing with its claws, every movement filled with purpose, as if it wasn't just cutting rope but repaying a debt. But the forest was no longer peaceful. The glowing eyes in the bushes were drawing nearer. Ibrahim realized the danger was imminent, yet the white bear's gaze never left the rope, not even for a moment. Loyalty was proving stronger than time itself. With the bear's efforts, the rope loosened further. Ibrahim twisted his body through the pain. One arm was now partially free. Blood began to flow again through his veins. That burning sensation was both agony and life returning. Scattered leaves, wet earth, and the flowing wind created a scene that felt like the prelude to a violent storm. Then the bear made one final, powerful yank. The rope loosened even more. One hand was now completely free. But at that same moment, movement in the bushes intensified. Leaves scattered, and the sound of approaching footsteps became unmistakable. The story was moving from memory into the real test. The door to freedom was about to open, but danger was approaching at the same speed. The rope had barely hit the ground when a terrifying howl tore through the forest's silence. The sound came from a distance, but was so piercing it seemed to make the night air itself tremble. Ibrahim turned his head and stared into the darkness. At first, only bushes appeared to move. Then, behind those dark leaves, two flame-like yellow eyes began to glow. Not just one pair, then a second, then a third. Within moments, these glowing points began to form a scattered but organized shape. The white bear immediately straightened its massive frame. Its ears stood erect. Its neck tensed. It was no longer just a protector. It looked like a sentinel of the forest, aware that its enemies were closing in. Within seconds, 6 wolves emerged from the bushes. Each step was coordinated, as if their movements were synchronized to one another's heartbeats. Their bodies were shadowy in the mist, but their open mouths revealed sharp teeth, and their eyes burned with hunger, bloodlust, and the thirst for victory. They knew their prey was bound, and bound prey couldn't escape. But standing before them was a glowing, magnificent shadow that refused to yield, no matter the cost. The bear raised its head and released a thunderous roar. The sound was so powerful that it seemed to shake the bark of the trees. Birds flew from their nests, and the air itself seemed to crackle with electricity. But the wolves didn't retreat. Their leader, a scarred, battle-hardened alpha wolf, stepped forward. An old, deep wound marked his face, perhaps a testament to a previous defeat. He straightened his neck, curled his lips, and with a dry snarl signaled the attack to begin. 2 wolves veered left, 3 went right, and 1 charged straight ahead. This wasn't a hunt, it was a calculated execution. The rope still hadn't completely broken. Ibrahim had one hand free, but the other remained bound. He pulled with all his strength. The fibers were slowly tearing. This was now a race against time. If the white bear spent too long on defense, Ibrahim might never escape. The bear took a step back, positioning itself as a shield in front of Ibrahim. One side was wounded, but there was no fear in its eyes, no thought of defeat, only steadfast resolve. It lunged left to block the first wolf, then pivoted right. But the wolves were beginning to surround it. Ibrahim's heart pounded in his chest. Every beat seemed to cry out, if not now, then never. The battle was about to begin, and the night had become the silent witness to this bloody confrontation. The first strike came with lightning speed. A wolf lunged directly at the white bear, but the bear's colossal paw delivered such a blow that the wolf tumbled across the ground twice before collapsing. Dust rose. The rustling of leaves filled the air, and the forest echoed with the angry cries of beasts. The alpha wolf, however, didn't retreat. He maintained his pack's momentum. 2 wolves attacked from the left, 2 from the right, and 1 straight down the middle. This was no hunting game, this was a battle of power and survival. The bear lifted its entire body onto its hind legs, putting its full weight into the stance. In the light, its white fur gleamed like a mountain of snow suddenly come to life. Then came a roar so deep and powerful that the very atmosphere trembled. For just a moment, it slowed the wolves' advance. But they hadn't come to stop. As soon as the bear turned toward the first wounded wolf, another wolf slipped in from the right flank and sank its sharp teeth deep into the bear's ribs. Blood spurted like a fountain, hot, red, and terrifying against the black night. Ibrahim witnessed this scene with his own eyes, and a painful cry rose in his heart. One hand was still half bound, but he continued pulling at the rope. The fibers were splitting, but time was slipping away with every passing second. Despite being wounded, the white bear didn't retreat. It spun around, grabbed the wolf by the neck, and slammed it to the ground. Dust flew again. The wolf writhed and then retreated, nearly unconscious. The balance of the battle was beginning to shift. The bear lunged left and brought down another attacker with a single swipe of its paw. The remaining 3 wolves quickly adjusted their formation, but now there was fury in the bear's eyes, a rage that transforms a beast not just into a predator, but into something unconquerable. It shoved one back, blocked another with a bite. The alpha wolf had been watching from a distance until now, as if waiting for the bear's strength to wane before making his final move. But then Ibrahim gave one last pull. The rope snapped. His other hand was now free. He was no longer prey. He had become the second living player on this battlefield. The bear was no longer alone. When Ibrahim saw his protector soaked in blood, he sat upright. This was no longer just one animal's fight. It had become the final battle of 2 loyal souls. Ibrahim's hands were now touching freedom. As soon as the rope broke, blood began to rush back through his veins. He took a deep breath, weak but courageous, and tried to lift his battered body. Pain shot through his shoulders like waves, but the will to survive was even stronger. Before him, the white bear was still fighting. Its white coat was now stained red, but it showed no intention of retreating. Ibrahim dragged himself across the ground. His feet were still bound. One final knot remained. He began pulling at it, his fingers wounded but his determination unbreakable. At that moment, the alpha wolf, who had been waiting for his opportunity, struck with lightning speed. He targeted the bear's ribs and sank his teeth deep. The bear's roar now carried a mixture of pain and rage. The blow pushed it back momentarily. Ibrahim's heart shook. If the bear fell, the next attack would be on him. He gave the rope one final yank and his feet came free. Now he was completely liberated. He tried to stand, stumbling. His legs were weak, his wounds deep, but his courage was steel. He used a broken branch as support and stood up, as if the forest itself had lifted him. Before him stood the wounded but unyielding bear. In its eyes was a message: we don't win alone, we win together. Ibrahim picked up a stone from the ground. Perhaps it was a weak weapon, but spirit was greater than war. He swung the stone through the air and hurled it with all his strength at the alpha wolf. The stone struck near the wolf's jaw. The wolf staggered, retreated, lost balance. This was the decisive moment. The bear lunged and delivered such a blow that the alpha fell to the ground. The remaining wolves began to hesitate. One was wounded, one retreated, one grew afraid. Now the hunt had changed. They were 2, and the opposition was no longer 6 but 4. Ibrahim picked up a long, dry stick from the ground and stood before the attackers. This was the same man who moments ago had been bound and helpless. But now he was alive and standing in the middle of battle. The bear and the man now stood shoulder to shoulder. The night was the silent witness to this fight, and the story was nearing its conclusion. As the intensity of the battle subsided, the forest's atmosphere gradually calmed. The screams, growls, and scraping of claws that had echoed off the trees just moments ago were now replaced by a deep and heavy silence. Ibrahim Traoré and the white bear both stood, exhausted and panting, but standing nonetheless. The ground bore witness to the violent struggle, deep paw prints, scattered leaves, and droplets of blood everywhere. The pack of wolves was slowly disappearing into the shadows. The danger hadn't completely passed, but for now they had decided retreat was the better option. Ibrahim wiped the blood flowing from his clothes, but his eyes remained fixed solely on the bear, still breathing heavily, still bearing its wounds, yet still standing tall. The bear had a deep gash on its thigh. Blood had spread across its white fur in red streaks. Ibrahim approached with stumbling steps. For a moment the bear lifted its head and looked at him, as if weighing the human's intentions. But Ibrahim showed both hands, empty, and said gently, "Now it's my turn, friend." His voice was heavy, but his words were soft. The bear didn't retreat. It slowly sat down on the ground, like a wounded soldier giving his brave companion permission to tend his wounds. Ibrahim picked up his old backpack from the ground, the one the poachers had left behind. Inside was a half-empty roll of bandage, a small bottle of antiseptic, and a bit of water. He washed his hands and gently placed cloth on the bear's wound. When the medicine touched the gash, the bear let out a soft whimper but then fell silent, as if it had come to trust that these hands were bringing life, not pain. Ibrahim wrapped the bandage, securing it tightly over the wound, and finally ran his hands over the bear's head. In that touch was gratitude, recognition, and a bond that transcended predator and prey. The bear released a low growl, but it wasn't a threat. It was that old sound from childhood, when it had been a small, wounded cub. Once the treatment was complete, Ibrahim sank to the ground in exhaustion. Both were now silent. Only the sound of breathing and distant cawing of crows filled the air. Time passed, and Ibrahim felt it deeply. He and this bear were no longer debts in each other's lives. They had become characters in each other's stories. This scene was like the soul of the forest itself sitting down to say, kindness is never lost. It always finds its way back. Ibrahim Traoré steadied his trembling hands and tightened the bear's bandage one more time. The bleeding had slowed, but the wound was deep, both on the body and on the heart. The bear slowly lifted its head and looked at him with its pinkish-yellow eyes. In those eyes was neither savagery nor predation, only a depth that erased the line between human and animal. Ibrahim, with shaking breath, placed his hand on the bear's neck. "You've grown so much, and I've survived." The words were few, but their meaning was mountain-heavy. His body was tired, his soul wounded, but his heart was warm because of this white giant. The bear took a step back slowly, as if contemplating, should I stay or should I go? Then it felt Ibrahim's touch one more time and closed its eyes for a moment. This moment was wordless but spoke volumes. I haven't forgotten. Not you, not the kindness of your hands. It turned but paused. This was the moment where a human wishes time would stop, where a relationship transcends the moment and reaches the eternal. But the forest's destiny doesn't stop love. It gives it a path. The bear began to walk slowly away. Its fur shimmered like pearls in the moonlight. Ibrahim watched it go, but in his heart was a strange coolness and peace, as if life had given him a great lesson and set him free with honor. The bear reached some distance, then suddenly stopped. It turned its head and looked back one last time deeply. The gaze seemed to say without words, our story isn't finished. Our paths have just separated. Ibrahim's lips moved. His eyes grew moist. He couldn't stand, but in that moment he felt like he was standing tall on the shoulders of honor, loyalty, and hope. The bear let out a soft, gentle growl. It wasn't farewell, it was a prayer. Then it slowly disappeared into the trees. With each step, its white coat melted into the shadows until only the echo of breath remained. Ibrahim sat there, looking toward where loyalty itself had walked away in the form of the forest. This wasn't a moment of separation. It was a promise that kindness finds its way back, no matter how many years it takes. The forest fell silent again, but this wasn't the silence that follows death. It was the peace that comes after life has paid its price. Ibrahim Traoré, leaning against the ground, sat up a bit more. His hands still trembled. His breathing was heavy, but his heart was stronger than ever before. Before him, written in blood, leaves, and dust, was an entire story, one where strength and mercy, hunter and compassion, human and forest stood together. Minutes ago, he had been a helpless captive closed to death, but now he was alive, and this life hadn't come from luck, it had come from the return of loyalty. Far away, where the white bear had vanished between the trees, moonlight still lay scattered on the ground like spilled milk. Ibrahim's eyes remained fixed in that direction for many moments, as if hoping to see it return. But he knew the forest had its principles. The relationships it keeps alive are not imprisoned. They are set free, so that when the time comes, they can find their way back on their own. Ibrahim slowly tried to stand. Pain gripped his body, but he managed to rise, wobbling. His steps were weak, but his resolve was strong. He wasn't just surviving, he had risen as a changed man. He looked at the pieces of rope scattered on the ground. This was the same rope that had bound him, but in the end, its breaking had given him freedom. Life is much the same. It imprisons, tests, and then frees us from the very place ere the greatest pain exists. He took steps forward, looked up at the sky, and took a deep breath. Kindness never dies. These words left his lips quietly, but their meaning held the power of lightning. That night the forest had rewritten a lesson. A favor can be forgotten, but it cannot be erased. Time changes, paths diverge, but the seed of goodness planted in the heart never goes empty. It grows, sometimes in days, sometimes after years, but it always returns. Ibrahim began walking slowly along the forest's rough path. With each step, the pain lessened, but the feeling deepened. He was returning to life now, but he wasn't the same man who had entered the forest. He was someone saved by a bear, someone whose gratitude was hidden not in words but in the gift of life itself. This story didn't end. It merely became proof that kindness is time's silent but most powerful voice, a voice that is never lost. Ibrahim Traoré would return to his post as a ranger. He would continue his battle against poachers with renewed determination. But every time he walked through that forest, he would pause at that clearing, the place where death had come so close, and where life had been returned through an act of remembered compassion. Months later, on a cold winter morning, Ibrahim would find fresh tracks in the snow near his cabin, massive paw prints, unmistakably bare. And beside them, carefully placed, would be the carcass of a deer, more meat than one bear could eat, left as if in offering. Ibrahim would smile, his eyes filling with tears, and he would whisper to the wind, "Thank you, my friend." The white bear was never seen by other rangers, never photographed, never captured on any trail camera. Some said it was a ghost, a legend of the forest. But Ibrahim knew better. It was real as the scar on its shoulder, as real as the bond they shared. Years would pass. Ibrahim would grow older, his hair turning gray, his steps slowing. But he would never stop protecting the forest, never stop teaching younger rangers about respect for the wild, about the invisible threads that connect all living things. And on his final patrol, many years later, as age and illness finally caught up with him, Ibrahim would sit beneath that same tree where he had once been bound. The sunset would paint the sky in colors of gold and crimson. From the tree line, a massive white shape would emerge, older now, moving more slowly but unmistakable. The bear would approach, sit beside the old ranger, and gently rest its head against Ibrahim's shoulder. They would sit together as darkness fell, two old warriors at the end of their journey, bound by a debt that had been repaid in full but would never truly be settled. When other rangers found Ibrahim the next morning, peaceful and still, they would see the massive paw prints in the soft earth around him, leading into the forest. And they would wonder at the story they didn't know, the story of loyalty that transcended species, of kindness that echoed through time, of a debt repaid in the currency that matters most, life itself. The white bear would disappear into legend, but the lesson would remain, passed down through generations of rangers in that forest. Protect the wild, and the wild will protect you. Show mercy, and mercy will return. Plant kindness, and even in the darkest night, in the most desperate hour, it will bloom. For in the end, the forest remembers. The forest always remembers. And somewhere in the deepest parts of the wilderness, a white bear still walks. A guardian, a ghost, a living testament to the eternal truth that kindness is never, ever lost.